So I'll ask people just while we're trickling in to mute yourselves as you come in. We encourage videos on, and just make sure that you're muted, and then you're free to unmute to ask questions later on in the evening.
And we're now live too. Okay,
I see they're rolling in right now, so we'll just give it a minute. People, sometimes I log into something right at on the hour, and it takes about a minute for me to go through the whole process. See what Nicola wrote. Yes, someone wrote in that, remember that WebEx is quirky for some folks' computers, so thanks for your patience. Okay, I did not know that. So maybe we'll get started then, if that's okay with you, Sharon and Emma. You ready to go? Great. So welcome everybody. I'm Katherine Bruns, the recycling coordinator for West Hartford, and really excited to introduce to you tonight Sherill Baldwin and Emma MacDonald of Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, here to talk to us about recycling. We are all confused about it, and what's allowed and what's not allowed does change from time to time. So this is just, I had a lot of interest and a lot of people asking about this topic. So I will let you all take over from here, and I'll be here to look at questions and pipe in from time to time. So thank you both so much for joining us tonight to talk about recycling.
Thank you so much for having us, Katherine. We're excited to be here and talk to you guys about recycling. So as Katherine said, my name is Emma MacDonald, and I am from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Me and Sherill specifically work in the Sustainable Materials Management Office. We're here to talk to you about recycling and what goes in your blue bin. So I like to start out showing the solid waste management hierarchy because this sort of shows how me and Sherill look at recycling and waste and just sustainable materials management in general. So this shows what our preferred end of life is for our materials when we're done using them. So the first place we would like for them to go to is waste prevention and reuse. So if you can not take that plastic utensil from the restaurant with your takeout and just prevent that waste from existing in the first place and use your reusable metal utensils at home that you already have, that is the best case scenario for materials. Reuse is our next best case. So reusing that plastic utensil if you did need it over and over again until you can't use it anymore. Then recycling and composting if the material that you have is appropriate for one of those systems, which a plastic utensil or a metal utensil are not actually appropriate for recycling or composting. But Sherill will go into more detail with that later. And then finally, landfill disposal and waste to energy facilities are the final step on the solid waste management hierarchy. So landfill disposal obviously is just putting all of our garbage in a pile. And we don't really like to do that because we would like to use our materials over and over again as long as possible and give them as much value as they have. And then WTE stands for waste to energy facilities, which is where we would burn our waste in order to create electricity and a smaller amount of material. So as you all may know, in Connecticut, we are currently facing a waste crisis. So this was caused in part by MIRA, a waste-to-energy facility that was in Hartford, which closed in July of 2022. So that closure caused a lot of our waste to not have a place to go anymore, because they handled a lot of Connecticut's municipal solid waste. And so now around 40% of Connecticut's municipal solid waste, so what we put out in our garbage bins on the curb every week or every other week, 40% of that is being shipped to out-of-state landfills instead of being handled in the state. And we don't like that because, one, it's not environmentally sustainable. Two, it's not economically sustainable. And number three, we would like to handle our waste within our borders. We would like to be able to manage it ourselves and not have to rely on other people to do it for us, and also to solve our own problems and not make it someone else's issue to deal with. So one of the ways that we have decided to tackle this problem of our waste crisis is the creation of the CCSMM, which is also known as the Connecticut Coalition for Sustainable Materials Management. So this coalition was created in conjunction with DEEP's commissioner, Katie Dykes, as well as municipalities in Connecticut. And we currently have more than 100 participating municipalities, which is really exciting. So some of the priorities that have come out of the work that the CCSMM has done are reducing the amount of waste that is generated in the first place. So coming back to that waste reduction prior to reuse, which reuse is another one of our priorities. We would also like to increase our food scrap collection programs, improve recycling programs by reducing contamination and reducing municipal costs for disposal. And finally, we are hoping to implement new approaches, including pay-as-you-throw and EPR programs, and I'll explain what those are in a moment. So pay-as-you-throw programs are also known as unit-based pricing, and they treat trash like a utility. So it is basically a way to incentivize us to create less waste and to throw away fewer materials. So it means that if you reduce the amount of trash that you're throwing away, you will pay less for your trash disposal. And currently we're paying through our taxes for our disposal. And so everyone sort of pays a flat fee across the board, no matter how much or how little waste they are generating and throwing away. So EPR is also known as Extended Producer Responsibility, and it is a mandatory type of product stewardship initiated with legislation. So product stewardship, it's basically the generator of the material is responsible for the end of life of that material. So we have quite a few EPR programs already in the state of Connecticut, and those include, as you can see on the screen, electronics, paint, mattresses, thermostats, and gas cylinders. So the gas cylinder EPR law was passed in 2022, so that program is still in the beginning stages. It hasn't totally gotten up and running yet, but it's coming soon. And the rest of these have been established for a few years. I'm not sure exactly how long, but Sherill might know those details. So some recent and new initiatives from CCSMM. Sorry that the lettering is cut off. We did some editing of this today and some things might have slipped through. So some of the things that we've been doing recently, Fairfield and a handful of other towns have been collecting their glass separately from their other recyclables at their town transfer station. And this is really exciting because in the mixed recycling system, when we sort out our materials, glass is the last thing that is sorted out of the system. And the way that it's sorted out is the glass is crushed and it's put through a grate. And so anything that's really small that ends up in our recycling system ends up in the glass. And so when we put small items into the mixed recycling, as well as our glass into the mixed recycling, that those small items that aren't glass contaminate the glass and make it less valuable. So when towns collect glass separately, it means that it's a much cleaner product and it can be sold and has a lot higher value for resale. So Wilton is implementing zero waste initiatives in schools. They have reusable trays, food scrap collection, and sharing tables. And they're leading the charge for a lot of other schools to start initiatives that are similar. So that's awesome. There's also the Sustainable Materials Management grants. So those grants are for food scrap collection, which is great because that was one of the goals that the CCSMM outlined earlier. And so some of the towns that are doing it are West Haven, Middletown, Ansonia, Stonington, Deep River, Seymour, Woodbury, Madison, and Guilford. And also, kudos to you guys, West Hartford. You guys have a grant. So good work. And we also have Bright Feeds, which is a facility that turns food scraps into animal feeds. And so that opening of that facility increased Connecticut's capacity for generating a better end of life for food scraps than going to our landfills. Or actually going to landfills out of state, because Connecticut doesn't actually have any open landfills at the moment that take municipal solid waste. So the Connecticut Materials Management Strategy that outlines Connecticut's goals. This is a 2016 document that was created by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And so it basically outlines the goals for how we want to manage our waste. And there is a draft update that is coming in February 2023. So that's happening right now, and it's really exciting. DEEP is also currently seeking input about infrastructure needed to increase or improve reuse, recycling, and food scrap management. So infrastructure needs, technology needs, if any facilities need upgrades, stuff like that, we want to know so that we can figure out a way to help out. We're also seeking input on challenges and opportunities to create regional waste authorities. So regional waste authorities are great because they can tackle challenges at a regional level rather than a state level. And they sort of know, if you could mute yourself if you are speaking in the background, that would be awesome. Thank you. So regional waste authorities, they're great because they can tackle regional challenges with more knowledge of those challenges. And so a better response to those challenges. So we're looking for input on challenges for starting those and for currently created ones. So earlier I showed you guys the solid waste management hierarchy. And that is from more of an operational standpoint. So that's more of how me and Sherill would look at things. But from an individual standpoint, we as individuals can use the zero waste hierarchy. So you can see some familiar R's in this hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle. Those three are definitely very important, but there are other things that we can do with our waste that are sometimes more preferable. So the first step on the list is refuse. So like I said earlier, if you are getting takeout and you don't need the plastic utensils because you're just going to eat it at home anyways, refusing the plastic utensils that the restaurant might give you is a great way to eliminate waste at the source. Reducing is also a great way to create less waste. So if you are going to get takeout and you know yourself and you like to order the extra large pizza because it's just so yummy and you want all that pizza, but you know you can't eat that much, reducing the amount of pizza that you order so that there isn't a slice that goes bad in the fridge by the time you get around to eating it is a great way to eliminate some waste. Reuse. Like I said earlier, if you do get that plastic utensil, using it over and over again is a great way to extend its life. Repair. Maybe not in the case of a plastic utensil, but maybe if you have metal utensils and one of them breaks, it could be great to repair them instead of just throwing them away. Repurposing. If your metal utensil is beyond repair, there's definitely a lot of ways you could use that for art, maybe a sculpture. Rot. If you have a piece of food that you are done with, like that pizza, and you have the ability to compost, like you guys with your program, you can compost that food waste. And then finally, before sending items to the garbage, recycling is the better option. So that is the zero waste hierarchy. And so this is all a way that we can be forming new habits, because I know that before I started studying sustainability and working on focusing on zero waste lifestyles, I wouldn't really think twice about what material I had in my hands and where it was going to go before just throwing it in the garbage. And so the zero waste hierarchy was a great way for me to sort of move down the list with whatever items that I had that I didn't need anymore and form new habits and figure out a new way to manage that waste. And so these are just some examples of things you can do to reduce your food waste. So you can take a picture if you would like to use any of these, but they're all just good ways to reduce your waste. And then we have purchasing to reduce or recycle. The one thing I want to highlight on this page is the Recycle CT wizard. There is an app that was created for a statewide list of what is acceptable in your blue bin versus what is not acceptable in your blue bin. And if you download the app or if you go visit the website, you can type in whatever item you have that you don't know where to put it. And the website will come back with exactly which waste stream it should go into. So if it belongs in your blue bin versus the garbage bin, or maybe a household hazardous waste program and stuff like that. So highly recommend checking out Recycle CT, either the app or the wizard online. These are some ideas for reusable and washable items that you can use. Some examples of reuse, sharing, and repairing that you can do. One of my favorite things on this list is in the fourth bullet, about halfway down, it's repair cafes and clinics. Those are really fantastic, and I actually heard that there's going to be one happening in Cheshire sometime soon. So if you, basically how those events work is if you have an item that is broken and you don't want to throw it away, you don't want to get rid of it, and you want to just keep reusing it, but you don't have the skills to repair it yourself. These events bring together people who have repair skills. So like sewing or IT issues. If you have a broken computer, someone would go who knows how to fix computers. These events are awesome because you can bring your items for free and these people volunteer to help you repair your items. So those are awesome. Shout out to those. So moving on from the zero waste hierarchy, this is the residential waste composition and disposed quantities graph from the Connecticut Municipal Solid Waste Characterization Study. So the solid waste characterization study happened in 2015. And basically what they did was they looked at a sample portion of Connecticut's municipal solid waste, and they figured out exactly what portions of each item or each material we were putting in our garbage bins. So as you can see from the graph, paper was the most common thing found in the garbage, followed by food waste, I believe, or those are actually equal on this chart. But food waste combined with other organics, that made up a very large chunk. And so that's one of the reasons why organics diversion is really important, because we'll reduce our waste output by a lot. Also included on here is plastics, metal, glass, construction and demolition debris, that's what C&D stands for, household hazardous waste, electronics, and other wastes. So, what is recycling? As you can hear in the name of the word, it is a cycle. It is represented here by many different steps that happen in the cycle. And the first one is collection. This is the one that I think most people think about when they start thinking about recycling. We sort our items and we put it in the blue bin and then we put it on the curb and it's taken away. But there's a lot more to it than that. And the next step is sorting and processing. So after our blue bin materials are taken away in the truck, they're dumped on a MRF floor. So a MRF or MRF is a materials recovery facility. And so when our materials go to a materials recovery facility or a MRF, they're just dumped on the floor and pushed into piles. And then afterwards, they're sort of shoved onto a conveyor belt. And once they're on that conveyor belt, they start being sorted and processed. And at the end of that sorting process, they're baled into bales of each particular type of material. And then those bales are sold to an end market. So this picture shows what plastic pellets look like. This is what our, what like an HDPE milk jug would look like when it is broken down into its base component again. So this is what plastic pellets for a milk jug would look like. So then those plastic pellets would be made into a new milk jug. And that is when they are recreated into a new object. So not necessarily a milk jug, but something new. And then we buy those products again off of the shelves. And then the cycle starts anew. We put that product into our blue bin again and onto the curb where it's brought to the MRF over again, sorted and processed, baled to specification, so on and so forth. So it really is cyclical and it doesn't end until someone sorts the material incorrectly, which hopefully won't happen. So this is a very busy slide. You do not have to remember all of this, but what this is supposed to show is that recycling is a part of a greater system where we are trying to reduce the impact that we have on the planet and use our natural resources wisely. So as you can see on the right side, the blue portion of the butterfly diagram, recycling is that outermost circle. And this is a more simplified version of that chart. So as you can see, recycling is still the outer layer of the circle. But this chart is just meant to show how recycling, while it saves energy and material input as opposed to natural resource extraction, it still takes production, distribution, and use. And each of these stages, each of these steps on this line represent money spent and energy consumed and just other resources needed. So that's why reuse, as you can see, that smaller circle is higher on the zero waste hierarchy than recycling is. So when we follow the zero waste hierarchy, we are trying to cut out those steps and cut out the costs and the energy used when we buy new items. So we've learned why we're recycling, but how do we recycle? So we dispose of our materials or recycle them in a lot of different ways. This is a list of all of the different waste streams that we have in Connecticut. So we have our trash. We also have mixed recyclables. I'm getting an echo, I think, from someone on the phone. If you could mute yourself, that would be awesome. Thank you. So as I was saying, we have trash, we have mixed recyclables, we have brush, textiles, electronics, plastic film. You guys have probably seen plastic film collection sites at grocery stores. We have food scraps, which you guys are working on right now in West Hartford with your grant, so that's awesome. We have bulky waste, paint, our EPR paint program, and then Oscar, because Sesame Street is fantastic. So this is Connecticut's mixed recyclables. So this is what our single stream or mixed recyclable system looks like. So this is from the Connecticut Solid Waste Characterization Study, that same study where we looked at what was in our garbage stream, and we also looked at what was in our recycling stream. So the giant blue portion is recyclable paper. So this is really important because this shows that recyclable paper is a large portion of our recycling stream, and it is very valuable as well. And Sherill will go into more detail on that later. Also included are aseptic containers or cartons, plastic bottles, other recyclable plastic, glass bottles, aluminum cans, and steel cans. And then our final elephant in the room, giant red wedge, is our contaminants. So this shows that in 2015, we had a lot of contaminants in our recycling bins. And we do not, this basically just represents items that are not acceptable in the blue bin program. So anything that was thrown in there that is not, is going to be sorted out in the MRFs and sorted out of our other recyclable materials. And so this was 2015, so hopefully we're doing better now. The statewide What's In, What's Out program, where there's a list of what should go in the recycling bin and what should not go in the recycling bin, started since then. So hopefully all of that education has done some good, and hopefully our contamination is no longer so high at 18%. So I will hand it over to Sherill at this point.
Great. Thanks, Emma. And thanks everybody for having us. Very excited to talk about garbage. How could you not be? So I get to talk about the stuff that's kind of dull and not exciting, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. And the first thing is really to talk about markets. The reason I talk about markets is because we have a lot of news articles, New York Times, national publications that talk about our recyclables are not actually being recycled. We also hear about our recyclables maybe getting dumped into the ocean, and that is not the case. Recycling is a business. These are commodities, and by sharing some dull data about markets will help you understand that these materials are bought and sold. Now, you may have heard about China's national sword policy. That was a couple of years ago before COVID, and what we were experiencing were some challenges with exporting our goods. Now, Emma mentioned that most of our material is paper, and so we want to make sure that we can send our paper or fiber off to markets. And a large portion of our materials were being sent to China. And China was saying, you know what, your stuff is too contaminated. And when I say you, I mean the country. It wasn't just Connecticut, it was all over the US. We were sending materials to China and it was heavily contaminated. And they're like, look, we don't want it. So if you think about our pie chart, right, we have, what was it, 18.2% contamination. And so at one point, China said, you know what, we don't want more than 10%. So what happens is when they're sorting and baling up that material, they need to make sure they don't have more than 10% of things that should not be in there. So when they have a bale of cardboard, there can't be more than 10% of plastic bottles or other things. And then they made it harder. They didn't want more than 5%. And then eventually they said they didn't want any of our plastic containers. They only wanted our cardboard, and it couldn't be more than 1% contamination in our bales of cardboard. It was becoming impossible. However, we knew it was coming, and we knew it was getting stricter, and we had started sensing it back in 2016. And so we had a lot of facilities that were coming on board to work domestically. And then COVID. While COVID was awful for all of us, it was awesome for recycling markets. We all wanted toilet paper. We all wanted, paper towels. We were desperate for hand wipes, etc. Well, that demand made all of the materials that we were processing domestically more affordable, more wanted. And so all the markets just like went really high. It was great. And now, of course, things are different. Our current economy is sluggish. Supply and demand issues are not going very well, or they're erratic. They don't make sense all the time. And a lot of people are nervous because of potential inflation. Next slide. So these are a little dated. They're actually from the end of December. I do get monthly reports about markets, and I haven't had a chance to update as of January 30th, but they haven't changed that much. What we're finding is that the old corrugated cardboard, or OCC, that's all of our cardboard, continues to remain the same price, and it's referred to as sluggish. It's not really doing so well. Might have even gone down a little bit more. However, it's still being sold. And then we have RMP. RMP is residential mixed paper. That's like all the other paper that we have. It's, the cereal boxes and the newspapers and our junk mail. And that is at a cost. It costs us $1.50 to recycle it. So it's still moving, and it's still being recycled. It's still being made into new products, but it comes at a cost because markets aren't so great. Next slide, please. And then even though plastic containers are a small portion of the recycling stream, if we're looking at recycling, I know plastic in general is a problem and it's a concern, but coming from the recycling standpoint, it's a very small issue because we only want plastic containers, and plastic containers currently have good markets. In fact, natural high density polyethylene, or what we might think of as a milk jug, is actually skyrocketing. And I know that these prices are low. They've actually been going up. Nobody has any understanding why they're going up, but for some reason, milk jug material is going up. And then colored high density polyethylene is like our detergent bottles. That's also going really well. Polyethylene, or what we might call soda bottles, that's not so great. It's sort of stagnant, but it is worth something. And then polypropylene is another material. We might find that in like our clear plastic clamshells. If you get like a sandwich at the deli, or I buy cannolis. I'm bad. And the cannolis come in these little clamshells. Those are polypropylene. Next slide. So basically markets are good for plastic, not so great for fiber, but our materials are being sold. So the big question that you are here for tonight is probably, are we doing it wrong? How are we supposed to be keeping up with all these things? And that's a great question. So first, let me say no guilt, okay? Don't have any guilt. We learn things all the time, and we just have to recognize it as a great opportunity to do better. So we are doing it right, but we do have some challenges that don't make it easy for us. Next slide. So this is a busy slide. And basically what it shows us, so this is from the USDA, they track retail products on our shelves. And so if you look at the orange or the blue, doesn't even matter. You can see that we have over 20,000 new retail products on our shelves every year. I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute. We have 20,000 new products on our retail shelves every year. Do you think those manufacturers of goods are having a conversation with me and going, Sherill, we're going to be using this type of packaging. Is this going to be acceptable in your recycling system in Connecticut? No, they're not. Do you think they're having the conversation with our MRF operators that need to process the materials and also find markets to sell it? No. There's definitely a disconnect. I will say over the last year or so, there's actually more and more conversations, which is hopeful, but there is definitely a disconnect, which is why we have so many products that sometimes we just don't know the answer. You know, Katherine, you have a great recycling coordinator in West Hartford. She, like a few others, bug me all the time, which is what we want. And so I often have to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you send me a photo? Because there's all these new products. If I don't personally buy them, how am I supposed to know? There's this thing and it's long and you know it has the thing and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And this is the challenge. This is the challenge we all face. And hopefully we can encourage manufacturers to join us and have a conversation with us and become part of the solution. Next slide. Another problem that we have, I know I'm just the bearer of bad news, are the recycling arrows. So I can't see a lot of you, but I would ask you to raise your hand if you rely on or use the recycling arrows to guide you with recycling plastics. Well, those of you who admitted it, thank you. But let me tell you, you're going to have to stop using them. They are not guides. They do not tell you if it's in or out. It doesn't tell you whether or not there's a market for it. And it's not about whether or not it's recyclable. It's whether or not it's acceptable in the program. Because this is a program that's about containers. It's about bottles, cans, tubs, and jugs. And when we first created the program, when we first created recycling programs in Connecticut, we did use these arrows. And I'm talking about like the early 1990s. And I know some of us of a certain age understand and remember that. And so we use them, but that's because plastic containers were still fairly new. And now we have all types of plastic, all types of containers, all types of products, mixed materials. It's very complicated. So I encourage you to not think about and use the arrows. I encourage you to think about, is this a container? Is it a tub? Is it a jug? Is it a jar? Or is it a bottle? And you could even include the little plastic clamshells I was referring to, or berry containers. But if it's just plastic, that doesn't mean that it's in. I told you I was the bearer of bad news. So next slide, please. All right, so this is the first quiz. If you don't have your video on, I encourage you to put your video on. Now to answer, it's a multiple choice and I usually ask for a show of hands. And so if you have never used the emoji thing, you can. So if you put your mouse to the bottom of the screen, might be different if you're on a tablet. You can see like a little button that says raise your hand, and then right next to it is a little happy face. If you click on the happy face, you can find a thumbs up or a thumbs down or raise your hand. Now this particular quiz, I'm just telling you there's more quizzes. For this particular quiz, I'm going to ask you what you think, if it's A, B, or C. So I'm going to ask you, first, did you know it was mandatory? And then what year did the law pass? Did the law pass in 75, 89, or 2012? So show of hands, who thinks the law was passed in 1975? If you can find the emoji, or raise your hand. Awesome. Who thinks it was passed in 1989? And who thinks it was passed in 2012? All right. Well, the law was passed. Oh, I love it. I'm seeing these little side things. I haven't used WebEx before, so I'm loving the little hand signals on the side. Thank you. So it was passed in 1989, and it's a trick question because in 2012 more materials were added, which is pretty exciting. And so when you hear about like San Francisco or the state of Washington or Oregon and how great they are and how much they're recycling, they're just now passing laws mandating that recycling happen for businesses or individuals. And you guys have had, I'm not originally from Connecticut, you guys have had a law mandating recycling since 1989. I think it's amazing. Kudos to you. Next slide, please. And then these are all the materials that are mandated by law to be recycled. So of course, if you don't generate it, you don't have to recover it for recycling. Next slide. And everything above the blue line is what goes in your blue bin or your orange bin or green bin. I don't know what color your bin your is. Most of them are blue, but these are your mixed recyclables. You'll see it says glass and metal, food and beverage containers. And yes, it has a number here for plastic containers number 1 and plastic containers number 2. And that's because, of course, it was written when? In 1989. And so it was a long time ago that this law was added. Corrugated cardboard, boxboard is like cereal boxes, newspaper magazines, and we didn't just call it junk mail, but it pretty much is junk mail, but it says white and colored office paper. And again, that just shows it's a little dated. And that's all that goes in your bin. There's a few other items that can go in because there's good markets and our MRF operators will accept it. But it's a pretty simple, it sort of harkens back to when we had dual stream. It's the same materials, we just mix them together now. Next slide. I'm just going to talk about the bottle bill real quick because there's been some changes and I get a lot of questions about it. So if you're not aware, Connecticut has a bottle bill. It was passed in 78, and it was implemented in 1980. And it was really about litter. Next slide, please. It was really to try to provide a deposit on containers so that people would stop littering them. It focused on carbonated beverages like beer, soft drinks, and mineral water. And then in 2009, water was added. And then you can see a really big list there in 2021, hard seltzer, hard cider, plant water, juice drink, tea, coffee, kombucha, plant-infused drink, sports drink, or energy drink was all added. And it became effective January of this year. So if you notice your grocery bill going up a little bit because you're buying these products, it's because it now has a 5-cent deposit on it. And if you buy it and you notice it doesn't have a little CT, a little Connecticut on the deposit, and you got charged a nickel, you'll be able to get your nickel back. It's just that a few companies have not been able to keep up. And so they've been given an exemption. But hopefully, I would imagine by spring, all will be happy with the world and we'll all be up to date. And if you're not aware, they're also adding a deposit. So instead of 5 cents, it's going up to a dime. And that's going to be effective January of next year. Next slide, please. And then there was another bill that was added in 2021, and that had to do with the little miniature liquor bottles that annoy us all because they're littered. It was not added to the bottle bill. Instead, they put a 5-cent fee on it. So not a deposit, but a fee. And the folks that put a fee on it are the wine and spirit wholesalers. They work with all the liquor stores and package stores across Connecticut. And if you buy a little miniature liquor bottle, you get a 5-cent fee added to that purchase. And then in turn, every 6 months, the wine and spirit wholesalers add up all those nickels and they link it geographically to where they were purchased. and they give that nickel back to the municipality where it's purchased. So I don't know how much West Hartford earns, but I think you've probably received 2 checks already. And I would imagine you're a fairly good city, so you probably earn a bit. But I live in New Haven, and I think we're one of the top 3, because unfortunately a lot of miniature liquor bottles are purchased. And so the intention of this money is to be put towards recycling programs or education programs. And knowing you have a great recycling coordinator, I'm sure she's putting that money to good use. Next slide. So in trying to figure out how to help residents understand what's in and what's out, we knew we needed to take some steps before we did a statewide education program back in 2016. Next slide. And then skip over it because we couldn't figure out how to run the video, but it's cute video. Maybe Emma will put a link in the chat. So what we ended up doing before we did a statewide education program is we created one universal list of what is acceptable in Connecticut's mixed recycling program. So that means West Hartford is the same as Hartford, is the same as New Haven, is the same as Waterbury, is the same as Bethel, is the same as Bristol, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because it used to be very confusing about who accepted what. And so we sat all the MRF operators down and we asked them these key questions about what is detrimental or problematic for your system. We first asked, we had a list of every single item we could think of, and we would hold it up and we would say, is this item possibly harmful to your employees? Could this item cause safety concerns? And then we asked, could this item cause problems to your equipment? Could it get tangled in your equipment? And then we asked, could this be harmful to the commodities that you're trying to sell? Meaning it could contaminate your bales of cardboard or contaminate your bales of soda bottles. And if that was the case, then we talked about keeping the material out because we want to make sure that employees are safe, that the equipment can do what it needs to do, which is sort all the materials, and then they can sell the commodities. Because if they can't sell the commodities, we're not able to recycle. Next slide. And from that, we created one universal list of what is in and what is out. And we promoted it through the Recycle CT Foundation, and they created this program. And it also has a search tool on their webpage as well as an app. Next slide. And so why is this important about whether or not we put the right thing in? Because contamination has a cost associated with it, and we need to make sure that the material is clean. In 2015, we did a waste characterization study, which Emma also mentioned. And if we look at it from a different perspective, we just focus on the contamination, the number one contaminant found was plastic bags and bagged material. So I'm just going to take a step back, and if you're bagging your materials now, deep breath, no guilt, just stop bagging your materials. And if you put plastic bags in there because you didn't know, now you know, and I encourage you to stop putting plastic bags in there. Next slide. So this is another quiz. Is the bag on the left trash or recyclables, or is the bag on the right trash or recyclables? Which is which? And I see everybody looking intently, and of course I am very mean because it's a trick, because it's the same exact photo on both sides. And that's to make a point. I think Emma mentioned a little bit about how MRFs operate, that what happens is the truck backs up into the facility, they dump their load, and then it goes up a conveyor belt. The first line of defense in the MRF is people, and people pick out all the contaminants. They pick out the things that are not going to make it through the system, because the system is a series of conveyor belts with magnets and blowers, and it separates all the materials. And so they need to pick things out. And if there's a bag of materials, they do not have time to open it. They're just going to chuck the whole thing. So if you have a bag of beautiful, clean recyclables, they're going to get chucked if you bag them. So it's an opportunity to stop bagging your materials. Next slide. And the top 5 contaminants: plastic bags, shredded paper, bagged recyclables or waste, tanglers. Tanglers are things that get tangled into the equipment, and that can be anything from wire to hangers, hoses, clothing, etc., even plastic bags. And then the last top 5 contaminant is bottle caps and other small things that contaminate the glass. Next slide. So this is a picture of a MRF. And what it is you can see it's sort of at an angle. And what happens is there are rollers, and on the rollers are these things that are very sharp like knives. And they basically push things up. How it works, I don't really understand, but it pushes all the materials up so it has the ability to continue to sort. But if those knives and those materials are all covered with plastic film and other tanglers, it's not going to do what it needs to do. And here is a picture of it covered with plastic film. Oh, we lost her picture. We lost Emma. So hopefully she'll come back, because it's a great example of all the different plastic bags and other tangles that are causing problems in our system. And what you can't see is in the picture. Oh, Emma, you coming back? Not sure where she went. But in the picture, there was a yellow, if you had seen it carefully, there was sort of this yellow color at the bottom. And what that is a man. It's a man because staff have to jump into the machinery 2 to 3 times a day and cut away all the plastic film manually. And so, of course, they shut down the equipment. And what can be more costly than shutting down your plant where you're trying to separate things? So every time there's contamination and every time somebody has to shut down the equipment and clean it, there's a cost associated with that. And who do you think is paying for that cost? We are. And so if we can reduce our contamination, it's going to increase the ability for materials to be processed well. So I don't think I have the slideshow to be able to show you, as it looks like Emma may not be back.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, are you back?
I'm so sorry. For some reason, my computer just decided to log me out for no reason, but I can share the slides because they're still up. Thankfully, it was quickly resolved.
And
so
then
we
I'm
were
aware
at
of
the picture.
Sherill, I'm aware of the time, and I know that we have participants with a lot of questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move quickly. You can see the yellow man down there. Emma, next slide. You can see all the materials he cleaned out. Next slide. So please don't bag your materials. Next slide. Why does quality matter? Because we're at the front end, so we want to make sure that we have clean materials so the materials can be processed easily to be made into new products. Next slide. And just to break some myths, pizza boxes are in, no loose bottle caps, no coffee pods, no shredded paper, no plastic bags, no plastic wrap, no polystyrene or styrofoam, and no black containers. Next slide. And some things to keep out, because we have to make sure that materials are safe for our staff and the people that work in the facilities. No batteries, no syringes, no propane tanks, no ammunition, no lawnmower blades, no knives, not just the plastic ones, but the metal ones too, and no diapers, yuck, gross, no tampon applicators, etc. Next slide. This is glass. And so when we keep talking about no little things because they're going to fall through the grate, next slide, you can see all these things that are in the glass because they fall through the grate. These are not containers. They're toothbrushes, tampon applicators, toothpaste, lip balm, pens, batteries, etc. So we need to do better. Next slide. And so there's a web page, recyclect.com. Next slide. It has a search tool. No, go for it. There's a search tool. There's an app, so you can download an app. There's lots of materials on the web page for you to check out as well and use, whether it be for your town or maybe your faith community or your special group. Next slide. And if nothing else, I encourage you to think about whether or not the item is acceptable in the program versus recyclable, because there are a lot of things that are recyclable, like my shirt is recyclable, but that doesn't mean it's acceptable in this particular program. So we can cut out the slides now, because the last slide says quiz. So I usually give a quiz. I don't know if you want me to try to quiz, maybe do like 3 or 4 before we open it up, or do you want to open up the questions?
We could have a raise of how many people have burning questions that they want to ask. Just in the question of time, I see one hand there. Yeah, maybe we should just start directly with the questions so we can get them answered.
So should we start with the questions from the chat? Because since I was moving the slides along, I couldn't type out answers to everything.
Sure. Somebody asked what an aseptic container is.
And I answered that by saying it is juice boxes, or sometimes it's the same type of box or container that broth comes in, or alternative milks. So this is an aseptic package. Oh, I'm having a hard time showing it. So in this case, it has chicken broth as a little thing, but this is in the industry referred to as aseptic, and it is acceptable in the program.
A question that I got privately was, can I recycle shredded paper somewhere? So a lot of towns have shredded paper recycling events. Katherine would likely know if West Hartford has any of those. Katherine?
Yes, we have 2 events a year. We have one in usually in May and one in October. And if you bring your material to the Department of Public Works, it will get shredded and that paper will get recycled.
That's a great example of the material is recyclable, it's just not acceptable in that particular program. It has its own program.
Great question.
Are bottle caps bad? Well, I don't know if they're bad, but you can leave them on, or if they're loose, don't put them in your bin. Great example, I've got a mustard container. This is in, and it's got a cap, so I'm just going to leave it on. If I took it off, this is fine to go in without the cap, but a loose bottle cap is out.
Another private question I had was someone trying to figure out which plastic bags they could recycle. So Sherill, I don't know if you have any examples of plastic film to show.
Yeah, let me see here. So I have a little bag, like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with my camera. A vegetable bag, right, that you might get at the grocery store and you put veggies in. These are acceptable as long as there's no food and sticky stuff on it. And then regular grocery bags. I don't know if you can tell what this is. This is bubble wrap, and bubble wrap is the same as film because bubble wrap is stretchy. So plastic film that's accepted at the grocery store is plastic that can stretch. Another example, believe it or not, is Prime, right? They now put these in bubble wrap bags. So it's bubble wrap on the outside, bubble wrap on the inside. And answer to your question about paper, you should remove the paper from these envelopes before you put them in the wrap. Some people told me that they have an easier time cutting them out. And so I've been following suit, and now I cut them out because it's really hard to remove it. So you just have an envelope with a little hole in it. Another way of testing it, if I can find, I don't have an example, but you know when you get a bag of grapes, that bag of grapes or a bag I guess grapes is a good example. It's crinkly. That's not plastic film. So if the bag is crinkly, like grape bags or even like chip bags, that is not plastic film.
I've been told that if you can stick your finger in it and it can press through and give, it's plastic film.
That's a good.
So there's another question too, and I know there's people with raised hand, but one more is before recycling cardboard boxes, does tape have to be removed?
If the box has traveled and you've used it and moved like, 5 times, yeah. But if it's just a little bit of tape, that should be fine.
Great. So let's take then questions. So Nicola, you had your hand raised.
I put my question in the Q&A. I didn't know if it was politically appropriate. I can present the question.
Which
I don't know if any healthcare
which question
providers.
is yours?
My question had to do with what, if anything, Connecticut is doing to address the volume of medical waste that is being issued. And I'm not talking about biological waste per se. I'm talking about, if any of you are in the business, you know that huge trash bags full of paper drapes and plastic drapes and tubing and syringes, more than you can possibly imagine, are accumulated every day for each patient. And I wonder what Connecticut is doing to ensure that the hospitals are, first of all, adopting recyclable products, and second, doing what they can to minimize waste. There looks like there's only one other person perhaps listening who remembers when we used to sterilize. We reused.
Yeah.
But that's gone.
When you're talking about medical waste, so what you're referring to, gowns, tubes, that's all medical waste, including biomedical waste. And biomedical waste is very heavily regulated. And yes, you can come up with alternatives, but I don't think our medical system would change. So what you're suggesting is a huge change to the healthcare world. That's beyond Connecticut. Even in terms of, we currently have consultants that will go out to businesses and help businesses understand how to reduce, reuse, recycle. So it's one business at a time. When you're talking about hospitals that are now really owned by about 3 companies in Connecticut, right? You're talking about large corporations who are trying to help people. And it's really challenging to get them to think about how to reduce and reuse in an environment that they have to have clean materials, especially after COVID. It'll be really hard to get them to do any type of waste reduction or reuse, especially if you're talking about sterilization. So I don't know anybody working on these issues. I don't know even people working on these issues nationally, because we're all part of these regional groups that have conversations with other states.
The reason I raised that is that what we are doing, as valuable as it is, I mean, anyone who's watching this program is invested in the notion that we should help to save the planet. But my eyes have been so opened by, I have 2 children in the business. It sort of doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry, but it is.
You don't have to apologize. I didn't create the system. We all just are living in and support the system every time we go to the hospital in some ways.
And it's not really
hard to break systems.
It's not the hospitals, it's the people who are selling the product to the hospitals. But I understand, I've made my point, and I'll continue to
Thank you.
call Katherine every time I have a question about whether or not one particular container can go in the recycling. What we're doing doesn't hurt. In other words, as individuals, it doesn't hurt. But if there was a national action plan, I understand the concern that it's the hospitals and sterility, but it is big business, and that's where we're little people, they're big business. Welcome to America.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
for
what
listening.
Yeah,
does
I
that
think
mean
that's
about
more of
itself?
that's a federal issue that you're going to have to talk to your representative or the senator to talk about it from a
I think
federal
Amaryllis
perspective.
has had
It's
her
more
hand
beyond the
raised for a
state.
while. As
Oh,
Amaryllis,
sorry.
yeah, just maybe good. Amaryllis, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, that was just me raising my hand
Earlier.
for
Okay,
one of the questions. Yeah.
all right. Did we answer the question about the empty prescription bottles? That's always a question we have.
Oh, I'm gonna actually make it a quiz then and see if we can see it. So we have small containers. This is vitamins, prescription. This is a container for spices. See if I can hold them all. And then this is a miniature liquor bottle. So is the miniature liquor bottle in or out? It is out. This one is also out. What about the
Be
spice?
slow, be slow. Which one's also out? These are the one things that I have. So what are you holding up now?
That's right. That's right. And the reason that they're out has to do with their size. And when we talk about contaminating the glass, and that is why. I usually use a little 2-inch by 2-inch grid, but Katherine has a great example where she says if it's about the size of a credit card, then it's too small and it's going to contaminate the glass. And then somebody also had a question about glass in the Q&A. See if I can find it because we're connecting to the glass. I think they were saying if you collect it separately, does that make it better? I'm sorry if I'm messing up your question, but a lot of towns are trying to collect glass separately. Not everybody. I would say, I don't know, I think there's probably about 10 or 12 towns that are collecting glass separately, and they have transfer stations. So not all towns has a transfer station. And so you can put it curbside or you can bring it to your transfer station. And at the transfer station, it's not mixed with anything else. It's just straight glass. And the intention, of course, is to try to make sure that we have clean glass. And then the town often has less contamination in their blue bin program. And maybe they're not fined as much for contamination by one of the MRF operators. And then they may also market the glass separately and not give it to the MRF. They may find a different market for the glass. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, yeah.
I think that might be rude, but can I just like get back because there are so many prescription bottles and these small bottles. Those are no good, not because of their consistency or medical business, but because of their size. Am I understanding that
Yep.
right? Okay, and what is the size again that you were like saying about a 2-inch grid or a 3-inch grid or?
Yeah, it's a 2-inch grid. So if it falls through, oh, wait a minute, let me try it again. If it falls through, then
So
it's too
spice
small.
bottles and stuff would also be no good. Oh, wow.
That's right. So some
About
vitamins,
the
some
size of a,
vitamins are really big.
Yeah.
Sorry.
about the size of a credit card is sort of a way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, Catherine's got a good example there.
Okay, here's a question. Sometimes there are plastic bin things with food stuck on them. How much food is okay? That's a question I get asked a lot.
That's a great question. So we're really asking you to rinse. But some things you may need to wash a little bit more, like mayonnaise jar, you might want to put water in it and then shake it with the lid on it to try to get some of the mayonnaise out. You might want to put a little bit of a soap and a scrub for tuna, cat food cans, or let them soak. And then peanut butter is another one you might want to put water in or maybe hot water and shake it around. I think the best thing to do with peanut butter, by the way, is to get a spatula and eat it. That's my recommendation. But other than that, it's like, I think if there's a little bit of food, you want to just try to pull it off, wipe it off.
Great.
And then if there's a little bit sticks on the end, that's okay. I mean, if you rinse off your peanut butter
sorry.
because there's a little bit stuck in, that cream cheese, that kind of thing, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
And then are you reusable bags that have a recycling triangle on them able to be recycled? There's a pesky.
So again, recyclable versus acceptable. So we have a lot of types of bags. So if it was a plastic grocery bag, that's accepted in the plastic film program at return to retail at grocery stores. All right. If you have a paper bag, we now have more paper bag options. So if you have a paper bag without any handles, you can put that in the recycling bin. If you have a paper bag with paper handles, you can put that in the recycling bin. And you can even put your paper in it if you want to organize it. I know that's how I do it. But if you have a paper bag with the cord handles can't go in, they're tanglers. So it's mostly gift bags, a lot of takeout now. And so if you're going to have to rip that handle off before you put it in, or if it's too complicated, just throw it away. It's better to not contaminate the load. So when in doubt, sadly, I would encourage you to throw it out.
So I'm aware of the time here. So how about this last question in the chat that I don't think was answered? What about the sturdy clear plastic plates and cups that have the recycling symbol, like Chinette?
Excellent. So recycling arrows, what do we know about recycling arrows? They don't mean anything, right? They're telling us what type of resin code it is, or they're just telling us it has the ability to be recycled, but not whether or not it's acceptable. So there are no paper plates or plastic plates accepted in this program. And that goes for plastic utensils as well. And if it's compostable, it's also not accepted in the program because this is not a composting program. So it's a no. Again, I'm the baddie. It's a on paper and plastic plates.
Right. I think we answered all of the questions that were in the chat and the ones that were emailed into me ahead of time. So I really appreciate you all engaging and asking so many questions. I did put a link in the chat to plasticfilmrecycling.org. And if you enter that in, you can find out where the drop-off locations for plastic film. So again, it's recyclable, but not allowed in your curbside recycling. So that's where you take all your Amazon mailers and plastic bags and drop them off. And in West Hartford, I can tell you, it's places like Stop and Shop, Big Y, Target, and also we have the Land Trust is collecting it at the libraries and at Town Hall. So there's a lot of places that drop it off in West Hartford, and we've collected thousands and thousands of pounds, enough to get 4 benches so far. You get a bench with every 600 pounds.
Wow.
It's shocking how much
Wow,
it makes you realize
congrats.
plastic film there. Yeah, that's thanks to a bunch of Land Trust volunteers who are doing it. If anyone wants to help out, I'm sure they'd like some help. You can contact me. But thank you very, very much, Sherill, and thank you, Emma, for this really interesting conversation. And look forward to having more of them in the future. And you can always contact me, Katherine
Great
Bruns.
program. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And download the app.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Great evening. Thank you.
Good night.